They thought they had erased me. They thought I would sit quietly in the shadows, pretending to be part of a family that never truly claimed me. But the truth doesn't rot. It doesn't disappear. It waits. And when it finally comes out, it burns everything in its path. My name is Daniel Cross, and for as long as I can remember, I have lived with the weight of being the outsider in my own home. Even as a child, I could feel it. The silences at the dinner table when I spoke. The quick glances my father gave me that felt more like assessments than affection. The way my stepmother locked her smile every time she looked at me. I was present, but never belonging. I grew up in a house built like a fortress. Marble floors, portraits of ancestors staring down from gilded frames. Long hallways that echoed when you walked them alone, which I did often. My father, Richard Cross, wasn't just a man, he was a presence. The kind that could fill a room with silence even before he spoke. He was respected by his colleagues, admired by society, feared by his employees. But to me, he was a wall. Unyielding, cold. My mother, Evelyn, was the only warmth in that place. She had a softness that made the house feel alive, even in its stillness. She used to tell me, "Danny, the truth is the one thing no one can steal from you." At 12 years old, I didn't understand what she meant. At 29, standing in a courtroom about to be disowned, I understood it all too well. When my mother died, everything shifted. My father remarried quickly. Too quickly. Catherine, my stepmother, was elegant, sharpened into steel. Beautiful, yes, but calculated. From the first day she stepped into the house, I knew she hadn't come to build a family. She'd come to cement her place in it. The kitchen stopped smelling like cinnamon and apples, the way my mother used to fill it. Instead, it smelled like expensive candles, sterile and perfect. Catherine replaced memories with control. I became invisible in my own home. My father never said it outright, but I could feel it, like I was a draft version of the son he really wanted. A placeholder until something better came along. And then, of course, something did. Catherine had a child, Michael. He was their golden boy, the one they placed all their hopes on, the son who could do no wrong. And me, I was reduced to silence. But silence teaches you how to listen, and listening teaches you how to collect. For years, I gathered pieces, snippets of conversations, documents left unattended, recordings hidden where no one thought to look. I didn't do it out of malice. At first, I did it just to prove to myself that I wasn't crazy, that the looks, the whispers, the exclusions weren't just in my head. Then came the day everything boiled over. The courthouse was filled with over 200 people, family, business associates, even journalists who caught wind of a potential scandal. I sat in the farthest row, my pulse steady, my briefcase beside me. It wasn't just a bag. It was years of silence turned into evidence. When the judge called my name, my father didn't let me speak. He stood, his voice echoing through the chamber. This man is not my biological son. As of today, I disown him from the Cross family and remove him from all inheritance. The air shifted. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Catherine sat beside him, her lips pressed into a perfect line, but her fingers twitched nervously against her skirt. Michael, still too young to understand the weight of what was happening, fidgeted beside her. And me? I smiled, not out of arrogance, out of certainty, because I had been waiting for this moment my entire life. My father thought he was ending me. What he didn't know was that I had already prepared the ending of his story. The courtroom had emptied hours ago, but the echoes of that declaration still clung to me like smoke after a fire. "You are not my son." I could still hear the gavel's rap, the scraping of chairs, the hushed murmurs of strangers who had no business knowing the fractures of my bloodline. But they did now. My father had made sure of it. I walked through the long hallway of the courthouse, like a man moving underwater. My chest was heavy, my footsteps sluggish. People glanced at me, some with curiosity, others with a kind of awkward pity. I didn't care for any of it. The only thing I carried was that letter and the DNA test, pressed against my ribs beneath the inside pocket of my jacket. The paper felt heavier than stone, not because of its weight, but because of what it meant. I should have felt vindicated. I had been waiting for this day for 12 years. waiting for my father to try to erase me, to bury me with silence and denial. And I had prepared. I had gathered proof. My mother's handwriting, still looping and elegant despite the tremor that had begun in her last years, was there in my hand. Her words spoke the truth of my origin, and the DNA test, clinical and irrefutable, supported it. Yet, walking out of that courthouse, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt hollow. The car was waiting for me outside, a sleek black sedan with tinted windows. My father's driver sat behind the wheel, straight-backed, professional. His name was Adrian, and he had worked for our family for longer than I'd been alive. When I opened the door, his eyes flicked to mine in the rear-view mirror. I caught something there, a flicker of hesitation, a quiet question. But he said nothing. "Take me home," I said. "Yes, sir." His voice was steady, but I knew Adrian. Silence was his armor. If he didn't speak, he didn't betray what he felt. As the car glided through the city streets, I let my eyes wander past the blur of glass towers and traffic lights. This city had always been my prison and my inheritance. Every building carried my father's fingerprints. Every deal, every brick, every contract bore the family name. And now, he wanted to cast me out of it all, as if I were a stranger. The anger rose again, sharp and suffocating. I clenched my fists until my nails dug crescents into my palms. "You heard him today, didn't you?" I asked suddenly. Adrian's eyes flicked up in the mirror again, then back to the road. "I did." "And you believe him?" He hesitated for a moment too long. "It's not my place to say what I believe." "That's not an answer," I pressed. "It's the only one I can give." I sat back, exhaling through my teeth. Adrian was loyal, but his loyalty was to the house, to the bloodline, to the institution of our name, not to me personally. That was the curse of being born into a dynasty. People served the family, not the individuals within it, which meant that if my father was trying to erase me, there was every chance Adrian would eventually stop being my driver, stop being anything at all to me. The silence in the car stretched. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the envelope, staring at it in the dim light. "Do you know what this is?" I asked. Adrian's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel, but he kept his gaze forward. "I have an idea." "It's the truth," I said. "The truth he's been bearing for over a decade." Adrian didn't respond. I laughed, bitter and hollow. "You're afraid to talk. Afraid that even a word might get back to him. He's that powerful, isn't he? Even after what he did today." Adrian's knuckles whitened. Power is one thing. Fear is another. Your father has always known how to blur the line. That was the closest thing to honesty I'd ever gotten from him. When we pulled into the estate, the gates swung open like the jaws of a predator. The house loomed at the end of the drive, its white stone facade glowing under moonlight. Home, though I had never truly felt a home here. The staff greeted me as I entered. The housekeeper with a stiff nod, the gardener with downcast eyes, the butler with the faintest bow. Their faces were neutral masks, but I could feel in the air, they all knew what had happened. News traveled quickly in houses like this. Whispers became storms behind closed doors. I walked through the hall, past portraits of men who looked like me but lived lives I could never imagine. Generations of wealth, power, and secrets hung on these walls. Every face seemed to watch me, to judge me, and then I saw her, my stepmother. She was standing at the far end of the hallway, dressed in black silk. Her hair swept into a severe knot at the back of her head. She held a glass of wine in one hand, her posture elegant and cruel. Her lips curved into a smile when she saw me. Not warm, not kind, predatory. "So," she said, her voice dripping like honey over a blade. "The bastard child returns." I stopped in my tracks. "That's not what the court said," I replied evenly. "No, but it's what the court thought," she countered, sipping her wine. "You should have seen their faces. Shock, disbelief, pity. You really are the family scandal now, aren't you?" I stepped closer, my hands tightening around the envelope. "You're afraid." Her eyebrows arched in mock surprise. "Afraid? Of you?" "Yes." My voice was steady. "Because you know this letter," I held it up, "and this test don't just prove who I am. They prove who you are. For the first time, her mask cracked. It was only a flicker, but I saw it. The color drained slightly from her cheeks, and her grip on the wine glass tightened. "You don't know what you're playing with," she hissed. "Maybe not, but I know you do." I turned and walked past her, leaving her standing there with her frozen smile and her poisoned drink. That night, I couldn't sleep. The letter lay on my desk, unfolded, the ink still as sharp as the day it was written. My mother's words danced in my mind. "The truth will protect you when the lies collapse." But I couldn't shake the question. Protect me from what? It wasn't just about inheritance anymore. It wasn't about money, land, or power. It was about identity, about belonging, about secrets that ran deeper than I understood. Somewhere in this house, beneath the polished floors and the painted ceilings, there were truths buried so deep they had rotted into poison. My father wanted to bury me along with them. My stepmother wanted me erased. But I was done being silent. If they wanted war, I would give them war. I leaned back in my chair, staring into shadows that pooled in the corners of my room. For a moment, I thought I heard something, a creak, a whisper, a breath that wasn't mine. I stood quickly, heart pounding, but the room was empty, or so it seemed. For the first time in years, I locked my door before going to bed. And even then, I didn't sleep. The courtroom was never quiet, not truly. Even in the tense silence that followed my words, the sound of breathing, the shifting of bodies, the scraping of a chair leg against polished wood, it all thundered in my ears. Yet when I pulled the envelope from my coat and set it on the table in front of me, the hush became something heavier. It was no longer silence. It was suspense, coiled like a snake in the shadows, waiting to strike. I could feel their eyes on me. My father's, my stepmother's, the judges, the jury's. Every gaze burned into me, demanding, accusing, doubting. But I didn't falter. My hands were steady as I slid the envelope across the wood. "This," I said, my voice clear, "has been waiting 12 years. A murmur rippled through the courtroom, a tide of whispers that rose and fell like restless waves. My father shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tightening. For a man who had always prided himself on control, the crack in his composure was more damning than anything I could say. The judge leaned forward. "What is that exactly?" "A letter," I replied, "from my mother, and a DNA test." The words dropped like stones into silence. The whispers surged again, more frantic this time. My stepmother paled, her painted lips parting as though she'd been struck. She wasn't used to losing. She wasn't used to cracks forming in her carefully constructed illusions. My father's lawyer stood quickly. "Objection, Your Honor. We were not informed of the supposed evidence prior to these proceedings." "Because you were never meant to see it." I cut in, turning my gaze on a man who had once tucked me into bed with stories of knights and kings, who had once told me I was his pride, his son. "This wasn't for you. It was for me. My mother left it for the day you decided I wasn't blood enough. She knew you better than you thought." The lawyer sputtered, but the judge raised a hand. "Let him continue." I reached for the envelope and slid out the contents with deliberate care. The letter's edges were worn, the creases deep from years of being folded and unfolded, touched and retouched by trembling fingers that never forgot. The paper smelled faintly of lavender, though age had dulled it. I unfolded it, my throat tight, and then I began to read. "My son," the letter began, "if you are reading this, then the man you call your father has done what I feared he might. I want you to know that nothing in this world changes the truth of who you are. You are mine in every heartbeat, every breath, every dream. But there are things you must know, things I could not tell you while I lived." Her handwriting was delicate, but firm. I remembered those loops and curls from notes she'd leave in my lunchbox, from reminders stuck on the fridge. My vision blurred as I continued. "The man who raised you is not your father by blood, but he chose to take you in, to give you his name, to protect you when you were small and helpless. Do not hate him for what he cannot change. But beware, the day may come when his pride, his anger, or the influence of others convinces him to deny you. And when that day comes, you will need this letter. You will need the truth." My voice wavered, but I forced myself to continue. Enclosed with this letter is proof of your parentage. The test confirms what I always knew. You carry my blood, but not his. I pray that when you read this, you will stand tall. You are strong enough to face whatever storm comes. You are more than a name on a paper. You are more than inheritance or pride. You are my son, and nothing will ever change that. The words blurred, but I blinked the tears away, lifted my gaze to the jury. Their faces were somber, attentive, some even sympathetic. My stepmother's lips were pressed tight, her hands twisting in her lap like snakes coiling around prey. My father sat rigid, his face carved from stone. But I saw the tremor in his jaw, the flicker of doubt in his eyes. This, I said, holding up the letter, was written 12 years ago. And here, I unfolded the second paper, the DNA results, is the proof. A test that confirms I am not as by blood, but I am still family. And I will not let them erase me because it's convenient. The judge gestured for the bailiff to collect the documents. My hands were suddenly light, as though the burden I'd carried for over a decade had been set down. But the relief was fleeting, replaced by a gnawing uncertainty. Because the truth was out now, and the truth had teeth. The lawyers scrambled to regain ground, objecting, demanding verification, insisting the documents were inadmissible. But the jury wasn't blind. They had seen my stepmother's pallor, my father's silence, the cracked spiderwebbing through their armor. The judge called for a recess. The gavel struck, sharp and final, and the room erupted into chaos. Outside the courtroom, the air was thick with whispers and flashing cameras. Reporters swarmed like vultures, their questions sharp, insistent. Did you know you weren't his biological son? Why wait 12 years to reveal this? Do you believe this will change the outcome of the case? I kept walking, my lawyers shielding me from the barrage. But their voices clung to me, echoing long after I left the courthouse. In the quiet of the waiting room, I finally exhaled. My hands shook as I pressed them to my face. The truth was supposed to set me free, but all I felt was the weight of it pressing harder than ever. Because if I wasn't his son, who was I? The answer came sooner than I expected. That night, as I sat alone in my apartment, the letter spread across the table like a relic. The phone rang. Unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. A voice low, rough, uncertain. I think, I'm your uncle. My breath caught. And just like that, the storm deepened. The phone call hung in the air like smoke, curling and twisting in the dim light of my apartment. My heartbeat thundered in my ears as I stared at the line, still showing the unknown number. I had been ready to face my father, my stepmother, the courtroom, but this was a revelation I hadn't anticipated. I'm your uncle, the voice said again, steadier this time. Not the one you know. The other one, Theodore's brother. I froze. My mind raced, trying to place the pieces. This wasn't just about inheritance anymore. It was bigger, much bigger, he explained in a tone heavy with years of restraint, that he had been watching, always in the shadows, that he knew what was happening behind closed doors, the manipulations, the betrayals, and that I needed to know the truth before it consumed everything. They think you're alone, he said, but you're not. You're the one they couldn't anticipate, the one they overlooked. You're the one who can unravel everything. I didn't move for a long moment. My apartment, which had felt so secure, suddenly felt small and confining. Outside, the city lights glimmered, indifferent to my storm. He told me about Vanessa, about the hidden relationships, about the schemes that had been orchestrated for decades, about a child who had been born not from the father everyone assumed, but from a union that was meant to be secret, one that even the most careful eyes hadn't fully grasped until now. And that child, he said, voice low, is your half-brother, not by your father, but by me. The words hit me harder than any blow I'd ever felt. My chest tightened, my mother's letter, the DNA test. Everything I thought I knew was only the surface. I wasn't just dealing with deception from my father and stepmother. This was a network of secrets, of lies threaded through years, stitched together to maintain a facade that had no foundation in reality. I spent the night poring over the information he provided, faded photographs, old letters, hotel receipts, handwritten notes from family friends who had long been silenced. Every piece connected, forming a tapestry of deceit so intricate it made my head spin. By morning, I had formed a plan. Not out of anger, not out of vengeance, but because the truth demanded exposure. This was about legacy, about identity, about finally stepping out of the shadows. I gathered what I had: the letter from my mother, the DNA results, the recordings, the newly uncovered documents from my uncle. Every piece of evidence was a thread, and together they formed a rope strong enough to pull down the walls of lies that had surrounded me. I knew the court would not allow all of this at once, but timing was my ally, and I had learned patience over 12 long years. The next few days were a blur. I met with my attorney, laying out the strategy in careful detail. Each revelation had to be introduced methodically, or the risk was that it would be dismissed as spiteful fabrication. We created a digital timeline, documenting every event, every inconsistency, every secret that had been intentionally obscured. I placed evidence in secure drives, duplicated them, encrypted them, and stored them in multiple locations. I couldn't risk anything being lost, stolen, or altered. Meanwhile, life went on outside the bubble I had created. News of the courtroom confrontation spread, igniting whispers in the city. Reporters speculated, neighbors gossiped, and family acquaintances began to look at me differently. Some with sympathy, some with suspicion. But I stayed focused. The game had changed, and I intended to play it with precision. Then came the visit from my uncle. He arrived quietly, without warning, and we spoke in hushed tones over a cup of black coffee in my apartment. He had brought additional documents, photographs, and recordings he collected over the years. Evidence of the affair between Vanessa and him, the careful orchestration to manipulate my father, and the true paternity of my half-brother. The court will not believe it all at once, he warned. But if you play your cards right, the truth will unravel in layers. Layer by layer, they will be exposed. And when the last layer falls, there will be no undoing it. His words resonated. This wasn't just a confrontation about money or recognition. It was about reclaiming our story, reclaiming identity, and holding the people responsible for years of manipulation accountable. For hours, we worked, planning each step with meticulous care. I felt a sense of purpose I had never experienced before. For the first time in years, I wasn't just reacting to the world around me. I was taking control. Days turned into nights, nights into mornings. Each moment brought a new discovery. Financial documents that contradicted earlier claims, letters hidden in plain sight, and photographs that told stories no one was meant to see. And all the while, my father and stepmother remained unaware of the storm about to hit. Their arrogance was their weakness. They believed time had erased me, that 12 years of patience had dulled my resolve. They were wrong. Finally, the day came to present the next phase of evidence in court. I walked into the building with the quiet confidence of someone who knew the truth and had spent years preparing for this exact moment. The room was packed, whispers echoing against the high ceilings. Cameras angled, reporters poised, and family members exchanging tense glances. I approached the podium slowly, letting the weight of the envelope in my hand anchor me. My uncle had advised against haste. Each revelation needed room to breathe. I placed the envelope before me, looked up, and allowed my voice to carry over the murmurs. This is not about anger. I began. It is not about revenge. It is about truth, about the reality of what has been hidden for far too long. Today, I will show that deception has been layered over generations, and that what you've been told is only the surface. The judge gestured for silence, the room stilling instantly. I took a deep breath and began presenting the evidence, carefully detailing each connection, each lie, each manipulation. Letters, photographs, financial records, and recordings flowed from my hands, each one corroborating the other, leaving no room for denial. My father's face hardened with every word. My stepmother's expression crumbled, the carefully maintained mask slipping, and the jury leaned in, absorbing the reality that was more scandalous than any soap opera, yet irrefutably true. Hours passed in a blur of revelations. The courthouse, once an arena of polite formality, had become a theater of exposure. The air felt thick with tension, anticipation, and fear. Outside, cameras recorded every moment, waiting to capture the fallout for the world to see. When I finally rested the last document on the podium, the room was silent. The weight of truth had settled over everyone like a heavy, unyielding blanket. I looked at my father, then my stepmother, and finally at the jury. The evidence spoke for itself, leaving no room for deception, no room for manipulation, no room for doubt. And in that silence, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: power. Not the kind that came from wealth or name, but the kind that came from truth, from preparation, from standing unflinching against those who thought they could erase me. This was only the beginning, but the foundation had been laid, and the storm I knew was about to break. The courthouse doors loomed ahead of me like the entrance to a battleground. I felt a strange calm as I stepped inside, each footfall echoing in the marble hallways, reverberating like a drumbeat signaling the war about to unfold. The air smelled of polished wood and fear, a mix I had grown accustomed to over the years spent in silent observation. Inside, the room was filled with the usual tension of legal proceedings, but this day carried something heavier, something almost electric. Journalists with cameras and microphones clustered near the back, their eyes sharp, ready to capture the drama that was about to unravel. My father, Theodore Harrington, sat rigid at the front, a portrait of control and arrogance, his chest puffed as if the very walls belonged to him. Beside him, Vanessa, immaculate and poised, radiated a cold confidence, though beneath it I could see cracks forming. Milo, oblivious of the chaos surrounding him, fidgeted at her side, the child entirely unaware of the storm that defined his existence. I walked slowly toward the stand, the leather of my briefcase creaking under my hand. Inside lay the evidence that had taken me months, if not years, to gather: letters, photographs, recordings, financial statements, and DNA results. Every single piece told a story the Harringtons had desperately tried to erase. I paused before the podium, letting the murmurs in the room wash over me. Every whispered speculation, every sideways glance from a distant cousin or former family friend, fed my resolve. I wasn't here to plead. I wasn't here to cry. I was here to reveal, to lay bare the intricate web of lies and deceit that had been spun for decades. Ladies and gentlemen of the court, I began, my voice calm but resonant, cutting through the uneasy silence. I am here today not out of malice, but out of necessity. What I present to you is not fiction, it is truth. And truth, no matter how uncomfortable, cannot be ignored. I drew the first envelope from my briefcase, the white paper crisp, the writing deliberate. Inside were photographs, old, faded, but clear enough to tell their story. Photographs of my stepmother and my father's brother together, in moments meant to remain hidden. Their proximity too intimate, too deliberate to dismiss as coincidence. Every frame screamed betrayal. The room shifted. I could feel the change in the air as jurors leaned forward, eyes narrowing, reporters scribbling furiously. Even my father's confident posture faltered for a brief moment, the kind of slip that lasts just a heartbeat but reveals everything beneath the surface. Next, I produced letters, handwritten notes exchanged between Vanessa and Wyatt, my uncle, the one who had secretly fathered the child that Theodore had claimed as his own. The letters detailed plans, manipulations, and the deliberate concealment of truth, each one a dagger aimed at the facade the Harringtons had spent years constructing. The murmurs grew louder, and my voice remained steady. You have been told that I am illegitimate, that I am a mistake. But today, the reality is clear. The true betrayal has been hidden in plain sight. The child you call Milo is not Theodore's son. He is the son of Wyatt Harrington. This has been concealed to maintain appearances, to manipulate legacy and inheritance. Gasps echoed across the room. Vanessa's hand flew to her mouth, her composure beginning to crack. Theodore's face drained of color, eyes darting between the jury, the judge, and me. Milo, sensing tension, clutched at her sleeve. The innocence of the child in the middle of our chaos struck me deeply, reminding me why exposing the truth was not just personal, it was moral. I laid out the DNA results, the most undeniable piece of evidence. 99.9% certainty. The numbers could not lie. The science was irrefutable. Every eye in the room was on me now, some in shock, others in disbelief. But the truth, unvarnished and raw, cannot be denied. Then came the recordings. Months of covertly captured conversations, audio from hidden microphones, snippets of Vanessa and Wyatt planning, strategizing, and conspiring. The recordings revealed intentions that were not just deceitful, but calculated. The meticulous orchestration of lies, the manipulation of my father's trust, the deliberate erasure of my presence in the family narrative. It was all there, undeniable and damning. I watched as the tension thickened, the weight of revelations pressing down on the Harringtons. Vanessa's mask had crumbled entirely now, her lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes darting as if seeking an escape. Theodore, once the embodiment of control, sat frozen, a man who believed himself untouchable, now exposed by the very truths he had tried to suppress. Hours passed, though it felt like minutes. I meticulously presented each piece of evidence, linking each thread, showing the patterns, the manipulations, the long history of secrecy. The jury, initially skeptical, now leaned in with rapt attention. The weight of accumulated proof was too heavy to ignore, too coherent to dismiss as fabrication. By the time I rested the final document on the podium, the room was silent, the air almost vibrating with the tension of revelation. I looked at my father, my stepmother, and the jury, letting my gaze linger. "The truth cannot be hidden," I said softly, yet with a resonance that carried across the courtroom. "It will surface, no matter how carefully you bury it. And today it surfaces." The judge's gavel struck, demanding order. But the impact of the evidence had already taken hold. Theodore's lawyer attempted to interject, to argue, to contain the unraveling. But even their words sounded hollow against the weight of truth. My uncle, seated quietly at the back, nodded subtly, his presence a reminder that the web of deception was broader than anyone had realized. As the court proceedings moved toward deliberation, I felt a sense of closure, though I knew this was not the end. Legal battles, social scrutiny, and familial reckonings awaited. But for the first time in my life, I was no longer in the shadows. I had claimed my space, exposed the lies, and begun the process of reclaiming what had been denied to me. Walking out of the courthouse, the sun had begun to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the steps. Reporters swarmed, flashes of cameras punctuated the twilight, and whispers of scandal spread through the crowd. I remained calm, holding my briefcase tightly, the envelope inside now empty, its contents absorbed into the record of truth. Outside, my uncle placed a hand on my shoulder. "You've done more than reveal a secret today," he said quietly. "You've shifted the balance. They'll recover eventually, but nothing will ever be the same." I nodded. The weight of what I had exposed was immense, but so was the liberation. For years, I had been the silent observer, the ignored, the dismissed. Now I had spoken. Now I had reclaimed my narrative. And as I walked away from the courthouse, I understood that this was not just a victory over deceit. It was a testament to endurance, to preparation, to the unyielding pursuit of truth. The Harringtons' empire of lies had begun to crumble, and in its place, a new reality emerged, one where the shadows could no longer dominate, where truth, no matter how long buried, had finally risen to light. The courthouse steps felt heavier as I descended, each footfall a reminder of the chaos I had just unleashed. Reporters swarmed, their questions sharp and relentless. But I didn't stop. The camera flashes didn't blind me. They illuminated a path I had long prepared to walk. The world was watching, and for the first time, I wasn't invisible. Outside, the late afternoon sun threw long shadows across the square, painting the scene with deceptive calm. But I could feel it, the tremor in the air, the tension stretching thin between those who had believed themselves untouchable. Theodore Harrington sat in his black limousine at the curb, his expression hollow, eyes darting as if searching for an escape from the truth I had just laid bare. Vanessa, ever the composed figure, was pacing inside the courthouse lobby, her phone pressed tightly to her ear, voice clipped and urgent. Milo, safe in the caretaker's arms, looked at me with wide, innocent eyes, completely unaware of the legacy of deceit that surrounded him. I moved through the crowd, careful not to acknowledge the whispers. Every word I had spoken, Every envelope I had revealed was now part of public record. But the real battles were only beginning. Social media had already begun to explode. Screenshots of DNA results, snippets of my recorded evidence, and photographs of secret meetings between Vanessa and Wyatt were circulating faster than any press release could manage. Tweets were trending under hashtags I hadn't even anticipated. Comments ranged from support to outrage, from admiration to vitriol. I read a few on my phone, letting them sink in. They didn't matter in isolation. What mattered was that truth could no longer be buried. As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed incessantly. Messages from friends, lawyers, distant relatives who hadn't spoken to me in years, and even some from complete strangers filled the screen. Each text carried a different weight. Congratulations, warnings, veiled threats. The Harringtons had created a legacy of fear, but now that fear had shifted, directed, paradoxically at them, by nightfall, I was back in my small apartment in Tucson. The city lights glimmered against the darkness like scattered jewels, indifferent to the storms of human emotion playing out beneath them. I set the envelope of remaining evidence on the kitchen table, now empty but symbolically heavy, and sat down, a cold drink in hand. I stared at the scattered pieces of my preparation. Each item, letters, photographs, recordings, represented months of laborious detective work, hours of late nights, and a lifetime of silent observation. The phone rang. It was Layla, my attorney. Her voice, calm and measured as ever, carried an urgency that made my heart skip. "Jackson," she said, "you've triggered something far bigger than just a family scandal. The press will spin, the lawyers will maneuver, and there will be backlash from unexpected corners. Are you ready for what comes next?" I leaned back in my chair, letting her words resonate. "I have to be," I said, "because the truth isn't something that waits for convenience. It demands exposure, and I've waited long enough." The next morning, the repercussions began in full force. Theodore Harrington's office released a statement, a carefully worded announcement aimed at discrediting my evidence, claiming it to be fabricated, manipulated, and legally inadmissible. Vanessa followed her own, framing herself as a victim of a vindictive adopted son, casting Milo in a narrative as an innocent caught between adults. The irony didn't escape me. The very child whose life had been manipulated as a pawn now stood, unknowingly, at the center of the chaos I had revealed. Yet, despite their attempts, the truth had already seeped into public consciousness. Viral clips of my courtroom presentation, DNA results, and recordings were being dissected across platforms: X, TikTok, Reddit. Analysts, podcasters, and online journalists examined every frame, every word. The Harrington name, once synonymous with power and unassailable control, was now under scrutiny like never before. I received messages from unexpected allies, former business partners who had quietly doubted Theodore's decisions, distant cousins who had suspected deception but lacked proof, and even a few journalists who requested interviews. Each interaction was a reminder that the Harrington Empire's power relied as much on silence as wealth, and silence was gone. Yet, with every surge of validation came a darker undertone. Anonymous threats began arriving, emails filled with vitriol, warnings veiled in polite language but carrying unmistakable menace. "Stop before it's too late," one read. Another simply said, "You don't know what's coming." I didn't flinch. Preparation had been my armor, and I had contingencies in place. But the reality was sobering. Exposing truth always invites retaliation, and the Harringtons were far from finished. That evening, I sat in my apartment going over the recordings one last time. Each whisper, each strategic conversation captured, revealed more than deception. It revealed intent, the meticulous orchestration control, and the willingness to rewrite history at any cost. Wyatt Harrington's complicity was undeniable. Vanessa's manipulations were clear. And Theodore, he had willingly blinded himself to reality for decades. As midnight approached, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. The voice was soft but urgent. "Jackson," the caller said, "you've done what no one thought possible, but you're in danger. They will come for the evidence. They will come for you. Protect what you have, and trust no one outside your inner circle." The call ended abruptly. My pulse quickened, but I felt a strange clarity. Fear would not dictate my actions. I had worked too long, endured too much, and the truth had been too carefully curated to falter now. Every measure I had taken, the digital vaults, the backups, the secure storage of DNA tests and recordings, was a shield, and I would maintain it at any cost. Sleep came little that night, filled with restless anticipation. The line between revelation and retaliation blurred. But as dawn broke, casting pale light over the city, I knew one undeniable fact. I had shifted the balance. For years, the Harringtons had dictated the narrative, controlling who could speak and who must remain silent. Today, I had shattered that illusion, and as I prepared for the next phase, legal follow-ups, potential criminal inquiries, and continued media exposure, I realized that the journey I had begun in secrecy, fueled by months of meticulous planning and years of quiet observation, was now irreversible. The Harrington legacy would never be the same. Their carefully constructed walls had cracked, and through those cracks, the light of truth, was pouring in. The morning after the courthouse chaos, the city seemed strangely subdued, as if it were holding its breath. My phone hadn't stopped buzzing, each notification a reminder that the world was watching, dissecting, judging. But I couldn't focus on the noise outside. The real challenge was inside the walls I had constructed for my own protection. The Harringtons were desperate, and desperation makes people dangerous. I spent the first hours of daylight reviewing every single piece of evidence I had gathered. Emails, hotel records, photographs, phone recordings, all meticulously organized in digital vaults. I replayed every recording, watching for inconsistencies, gaps, anything that might have been missed in the chaos of courtroom. Even a tiny discrepancy could be twisted against me, weaponized by lawyers eager to discredit my story. I knew I had to be bulletproof. By noon, my phone rang again. This time it was Rosie, the former housekeeper. Her voice trembled slightly over the line. "Jackson, I didn't know who else to call. They're asking questions, digging into records. They want to know what you have." I leaned against the counter, trying to steady my pulse. "Rosie, stay calm. Do not share anything, and do not let them see fear. You've already done more than you realize." She hesitated, then whispered, "I'll be careful." I knew that warning wasn't enough. The Harringtons had allies in unexpected places. Family friends, business associates, even local authorities who had long been indebted to their influence. I couldn't trust anyone outside the circle I had built myself. For the first time in years, I realized the loneliness that came with pursuing truth. It was exhilarating and terrifying at the same time. The evening brought another layer of tension. I noticed subtle movements outside my apartment window, cars lingering too long, shadows that didn't belong. Every instinct screamed at me that they were watching, waiting for a misstep. I didn't panic. Instead, I worked methodically, installing security cameras, motion sensors, and backup communication lines. I had prepared for the scenario, but living it was a different kind of test. I spent the night going through Eleanor's letters again, looking for guidance, reassurance, something to steady my resolve. Each word reminded me why I had taken this path. She had loved me unconditionally, and she had prepared me for the moment when truth would need a voice. Her wisdom wasn't just a comfort. It was a shield. A knock at the door startled me. Heart pounding, I approached cautiously, peering through the peephole. No one, just an envelope on the mat, unmarked. I opened it to find a single photograph. Vanessa, Wyatt, and a briefcase labeled with the Harrington family crest. I understood immediately. This was a message, a warning. They were showing me that they knew what I had, that they could strike at any moment. I didn't respond. I simply placed it in a secure safe, locked it, and continued my work. The next morning, I decided to expand my strategy. The digital world was my ally. I began encrypting all my findings, sharing secure copies with trusted legal counsel, and planning for public disclosure that would prevent any further attempts to manipulate the narrative. Every email, every photograph, every recording had to be accounted for and fortified against sabotage. It wasn't long before I began receiving messages from distant relatives. People would remain silent for decades, watching the Harringtons manipulate family fortune and power. They offered pieces of their own knowledge. Old letters, forgotten photos, hints about hidden meetings and financial irregularities. With each contribution, the web of deception grew more complex but also clearer. I began to see the full extent of the betrayal. Vanessa and Wyatt's relationship wasn't just a hidden affair. It was a deliberate orchestration to control the Harrington lineage, erasing my rightful place and attempting to legitimize their own ambitions. By the end of the week, the tension became unbearable. Every interaction, every knock, every phone buzz felt like a test. I couldn't predict the Harringtons' next move, but I could anticipate their desperation. And desperation makes people reckless. I realized that patience was my greatest weapon. I didn't need to confront them physically or publicly yet. The evidence I had, combined with their overconfidence, would eventually make them unravel themselves. Late one night, as I reviewed hotel invoices and correspondence between Vanessa and Wyatt, a chilling realization settled in. They had been planning to manipulate not just a family legacy, but also corporate assets, trusts, and public perception. Milo was a central pawn in this game, meant to legitimize Wyatt's position while keeping me sidelined. I felt a pang of anger, but also clarity. This wasn't just about inheritance or pride. It was about exposing the moral corruption that had been hidden behind the Harrington name for decades. As dawn approached, I sent out secure copies of all my findings to select journalists and legal allies, encrypted and traceable. It was a calculated risk, but one I had to take. The Harringtons had been untouchable for too long, and their arrogance was their weakness. The moment the public learned the depth of their deception, their empire control would crumble. Sitting back, I allowed myself a brief moment of reflection. The path I had chosen was dangerous, isolating, and fraught with risk. Yet, it was the only path that could bring justice for Eleanor, for myself, and for the truth that had been buried under decades of lies. As I stared at the first light of morning filtering through the blinds, I whispered softly, "This is only the beginning." The Harringtons would soon learn that power, when built on deceit, is fragile, and I had become a force that would expose every hidden truth, every manipulated story, and every carefully concealed betrayal. By the time the first media reports hit the morning news, I was already immersed in a web of encrypted files, strategically preparing for every possible reaction. The clip from the courthouse, the DNA results, the envelope, the chaos, had gone viral overnight. Millions had seen it. The world was judging, dissecting, aligning themselves either with me or with the Harringtons. I didn't care about the factions. I cared about truth. The phone didn't stop ringing. Reporters, journalists, anonymous tips, even distant relatives all tried to reach me. Some offered support, others threats. I started screening calls, encrypting messages, and keeping a precise log of everything. The Harringtons' lawyers were already in motion, trying to file injunctions to suppress the evidence, to paint me as unstable. But they didn't realize the digital traces were unalterable, tamper-proof, and ready for public scrutiny. By mid-morning, social media had exploded. Every platform seemed alive with discussion, speculation, and outrage. Hashtags like hashtag Justice for Jackson, hashtag Harrington Scandal, and hashtag Truth Exposed were trending. People debated motives, legality, and morality. But underneath all that, a collective fascination with betrayal, power, and revenge had gripped the public. I watched silently, knowing that visibility was both my shield and my sword. I decided to create a timeline, a public record of everything I had uncovered, meticulously organized and verifiable. Each entry was accompanied by images, emails, receipts, and footage that corroborated my account. I released it anonymously at first, ensuring that the story wasn't filtered through biased media channels. The narrative was clear. Vanessa and Wyatt had orchestrated deception, manipulating family lineage and corporate assets, while erasing the existence of those who stood in their way. The Harringtons' response was immediate and predictable. Press conferences, denial statements, carefully curated photos of their perfect family, and lawyers threatening lawsuits. They painted me as a bitter, vengeful outsider, but the evidence didn't lie. Each claim they made was disproved almost immediately by facts I had already prepared. Their credibility was dissolving, and they knew it. Within hours, investigative journalists began digging deeper. They uncovered inconsistencies in corporate filings, travel records, and personal correspondences that aligned with the evidence I had exposed. Local news channels aired segments analyzing the DNA results, comparing public records, and highlighting the hidden layers of betrayal. The Harrington Empire, built on secrecy and control, was unraveling before my eyes. Yet, the personal cost was real. I felt eyes on me everywhere, neighbors, strangers, even friends who hesitated to engage. Every movement was calculated, every interaction measured. The Harringtons had resources and connections, and they weren't afraid to use them. Anonymous threats escalated. Messages on social media became aggressive, sometimes violent. Someone had gone through my apartment complex records. Someone had tried to follow me home. I wasn't scared, I was cautious. Amid the chaos, I also received unexpected allies. A few of Eleanor's old friends, who had watched the Harringtons manipulate events silently for years, reached out with corroborating evidence and moral support. Lawyers with reputations for integrity volunteered to review my files and advise me. Even distant relatives, previously silent, began sharing accounts that reinforced a pattern of deception. I realized then that exposing the Harringtons wasn't just a personal battle. It was a fight for justice for anyone silenced by wealth and manipulation. The turning point came when a prominent national journalist published an investigative piece, framing the story not as a scandal, but as a systemic exposure of corruption within a family dynasty. The article included interviews with experts in law, psychology, and corporate ethics, highlighting the intricate layers of deception orchestrated by Vanessa and Wyatt. Public opinion began shifting. Sympathy for me increased, while their influence started to wane. But I couldn't celebrate. Milo remained a pawn, still surrounded by people who want to control his life for their gain. The thought of his future weighed heavily on me. I knew I had to protect him from further manipulation, while simultaneously ensuring the truth remained in the public eye. Every decision I made now had ripple effects. One wrong move, and the Harringtons could exploit it to silence the narrative once more. In the midst of the growing public interest, I made a quiet decision. I would not allow myself to be drawn into media theatrics or sensationalism. The story needed to remain fact-driven, anchored in evidence. Every interview, every public statement, was carefully crafted to reinforce transparency, without unnecessary drama. I realized that the power of truth was more potent than any act of revenge. As night fell, I reviewed all the digital traces once more. Emails, video footage, photographs, audio recordings. They were all secure, all verified, and all ready to be presented in court if needed. I felt a quiet satisfaction. For the first time in years, the fear of being erased, of being silenced by those who claimed authority, was replaced by the calm certainty that I had prepared for every scenario. Yet, beneath the calm, a storm was brewing. The Harringtons were not yet defeated. Their desperation would only grow, and their methods would become more unpredictable. I had ignited a public reckoning, but the personal battle, the confrontation with those who had sought to erase me, was still ahead. I knew that every step I took now would need to be deliberate, every move calculated with precision. Sitting alone in my apartment, I looked at the first light of dawn breaking over the city skyline. The chaos of the past week had changed everything. My life, the Harrington legacy, and the very perception of truth had been altered irreversibly. And yet, I felt a profound sense of purpose. I wasn't just exposing betrayal. I was reclaiming agency, rewriting the narrative, and ensuring that lies built on power and privilege could no longer go unchallenged. I whispered to the empty room, "The world is watching. Let them see everything. Let them know who they've been dealing with." And for the first time, the long, lonely fight for truth felt like it was beginning to reach its critical turning point. The day the Harringtons decided to respond publicly, I was already 2 steps ahead. Every move they had planned, the press releases, the staged photographs, the carefully curated interviews, was predictable. I had anticipated their strategy month before, and I had prepared accordingly. I wasn't just fighting for inheritance or validation. I was defending the truth, Eleanor's legacy, and every silenced voice that had been ignored within that household. I watched from a small rented office as the first waves of the Harrington counter-narrative spread across the media. They painted me as unhinged, obsessed with a family that had supposedly rejected me. They called the evidence fabricated, a stunt by a vengeful son. But the pattern was clear. Their credibility was fracturing with every public scrutiny, every fact-checking journalist who cross-referenced my evidence. Each new article reaffirmed the veracity of my claims. I felt a grim satisfaction. The first cracks were showing. Milo remained a constant concern. Vanessa had tried to use him as a shield, positioning herself as a protector of his innocence. But I knew the truth. Milo was not Theo's son, and the real danger lay in Harrington's willingness to rewrite reality around him. My mission expanded beyond the courtroom and the media. It was now about protecting the boy from manipulation while exposing the architects of his false narrative. Wyatt, meanwhile, became reckless. He began leaking selective information to journalists, attempting to discredit the DNA results by emphasizing hypothetical errors. He underestimated the meticulous chain of custody I preserved. Every envelope, every lab confirmation, every timestamp photograph of the evidence was intact. His attempts to manipulate public perception fell flat. In fact, they reinforced the sense that he was panicking, desperate, and guilty. In private, I coordinated with legal counsel and trusted allies. We devised a timeline for potential lawsuits, injunctions, and public statements. Every press release from the Harrington camp was countered with precise, factual documentation. The court of public opinion was no longer just a battleground. It had become a powerful ally. I realized that the world watching me had become a secondary layer of protection. Each new exposure of their deception increased accountability and limited the Harrington capacity for further subterfuge. The confrontation came to a head when an independent media outlet aired an investigative segment featuring excerpts from Eleanor's journals, the video evidence, and corroborating testimonies from family friends who had witnessed Vanessa and Wyatt's manipulations firsthand. The segment didn't just expose them. It painted a broader picture of betrayal, secrecy, and abuse of power that extended far beyond my personal story. The Harrington Empire's image crumbled on air, their cultivated veneer of perfection shattered. I stayed in the shadows, letting the evidence speak. I had no desire for public heroism. I only wanted the truth recognized. I reviewed the video clips one last time, noticing details I had previously overlooked. Subtle gestures, fleeting expressions, and moments that now carried the weight of undeniable betrayal. Vanessa's eyes, the way Wyatt avoided the camera, the meticulous repositioning of photographs. They all told a story Eleanor had trusted me to reveal. That night, alone in my apartment, I sent a final encrypted message to my attorney. The plan was clear. Maintain control, protect Milo, and ensure no legal or media maneuver could distort the evidence. The Harringtons would attempt everything to discredit me, but the truth was indelible, immutable, and now permanently documented. As I closed my laptop, I reflected on the journey. The years of suppression, the sense of isolation, the careful collection of proof, and the courage it took to stand against a family that once claimed I didn't belong. For the first time, I felt an unshakable clarity. I wasn't seeking revenge. I was ensuring justice, preserving Eleanor's legacy, and reclaiming the narrative that had been stolen from me. Tomorrow, the Harringtons would face the final exposure. Public scrutiny, legal consequences, and undeniable evidence would converge. And I knew, with a certainty born of preparation and patience, that nothing they did could undo what had already been revealed. The morning sun had barely risen over Tucson when I stepped outside, feeling the weight of months of preparation pressing against my chest like a storm waiting to break. Today wasn't just another day. It was a culmination of everything Eleanor had entrusted me with, everything I had fought to preserve, and everything the Harringtons had tried to bury. I could feel the tension vibrating through the streets, an invisible current that seemed to follow me as I drove toward the Phoenix Herald offices one last time. Inside the newsroom, I laid out the final pieces of evidence. Each document, each video clip, each meticulously verified record was placed on the table like soldiers preparing for battle. My attorney, Layla, moved with quiet precision, checking for legal vulnerabilities, anticipating potential attacks, and ensuring that nothing could be twisted or dismissed. "This is airtight," she said, her voice steady but low. "There's no way for them to spin it now." I nodded, feeling a rare calm settle over me, the kind of calm that only comes from knowing that truth is on your side. The first ripple hit the media before noon. An exclusive release detailed every aspect of the Harrington deception, the affair, the hidden paternity, the manipulated inheritance, and the lengths they had gone to silence me. Social media erupted almost instantly. Comments, shares, reactions, they came like a tidal wave. The hashtag Justice for Jackson trended nationally within hours, capturing the attention of journalists, talk shows, and online communities alike. For once, the truth wasn't whispered behind closed doors. It was screamed from every platform, unavoidable and undeniable. I stayed in the newsroom, watching as reporters cross-referenced my evidence, fact-checked every claim, and confirmed what I had always known. Wyatt Harrington was Milo's biological father, not Theo, and Vanessa had orchestrated the concealment. The Harrington empire, long cloaked in power, prestige, and illusion of perfection, was unraveling in real time. I didn't feel triumph. Not exactly. I felt a profound weight of responsibility. The recognition that truth, once unleashed, changes lives in ways beyond control. By evening, the Harringtons were scrambling. Vanessa's public image was crumbling. Every move she made, every statement she released, was dissected and refuted with precise evidence. Theo retreated from public appearances entirely, his once impeccable posture now betraying exhaustion, anger, and shame. Wyatt attempted to rally support through interviews, claiming fabrication and defamation, but the evidence was overwhelming. The audio, the videos, the documents, all corroborated one another with unbreakable consistency. Their narrative collapsed under the sheer weight of fact. But the most poignant moment came quietly. Milo, oblivious to the chaos surrounding him, came into my office carrying a stuffed lion, his wide eyes reflecting innocence and curiosity. I crouched to his level, letting him place the toy in my hands. "You're safe?" I whispered, not just to him, but to Eleanor, to myself, to the truth. He didn't need to understand the full gravity yet. He only needed to know that integrity, justice, and love were protecting him. In that moment, I realized the fight had never truly been about money or recognition. It had always been about preserving what was right, what was genuine, and what Eleanor had cherished most: truth. By nightfall, the final legal repercussions were already in motion. Lawsuits, resignations, and investigations were underway. The Harrington empire had been exposed, their manipulation laid bare for the world to see. The media, social platforms, and legal system converged, ensuring that no lie would go unpunished, no deceit unchallenged. I sat alone later, reviewing the day's events, feeling the silence after the storm. It wasn't victory. It was closure, the envelope I had carried for so long. The DNA results, Eleanor's letter, and every other secret was finally irrelevant in its weight, because the truth it contained had become universal, impossible to erase. I thought of Eleanor, her gentle voice echoing in my mind. You never really know how strong you are until the truth is the only thing you have left. I had learned that strength wasn't measured in confrontation or vindication. It was measured in patience, preparation, and the courage to let the truth speak, even when it seemed impossible. And now, as the Harrington name and legacy were irrevocably altered, I knew I had honored her. I had reclaimed my story, my identity, and the narrative that had been stolen from me. Sitting in the quiet of the office, Milo asleep nearby, I allowed myself a rare moment of peace. The battle wasn't over. There would always be echoes, challenges, and the lingering shadows of those who tried to deceive, but the core, the heart of it, was complete. Eleanor's trust, my persistence, and the undeniable truth had prevailed. And in that moment, I understood. No power, no wealth, no manipulation could ever truly erase the weight of truth when it was wielded with patience, precision, and love. The storm had passed. The Harringtons' empire had fallen. And for the first time in my life, I felt whole. Weeks had passed since the Harrington empire began to crumble. Yet the echoes of that courtroom and every revelation lingered like a shadow across my life. Tucson felt different now. The streets I walked, the cafes I frequented, even the quiet corners of my apartment seemed infused with strange calm. I was no longer Jackson Harrington by name alone. I was Jackson Harrington by truth, by the weight of evidence and the unshakable reality I had fought to reveal. The media frenzy had subsided somewhat, though the story still resonated in unexpected ways. Every so often, a stranger would approach me in a bookstore or at a coffee shop. Some thanked me for exposing the lies. Others whispered that my courage had changed the way they viewed their own families. One afternoon, a journalist from a national network called, requesting an in-depth interview. I declined. I had no desire to relive the chaos. The narrative had been set. The truth had been told. And it was enough. Milo had adjusted remarkably well, considering the upheaval surrounding his life. He didn't fully understand the intricacies of legal documents or DNA results, but he felt the honesty, the integrity, the absence of deceit that had once haunted his every interaction with adults. Watching him sleep at night, seeing the quiet trust in his gaze when he spoke to me, I realized the battle had always been about this. The next generation, the preservation of family untainted by lies. Theo Harrington remained out of the public eye entirely. His company, once the pinnacle of his pride, had suffered irreparably. Investors pulled out, executives resigned, and the lavish offices he had once ruled like a king now stood eerily quiet. Rumors suggested that Vanessa had left the state, her assets frozen in ongoing legal disputes. Wyatt Harrington, exposed and disgraced, had become a pariah in his professional and social circles. Justice, however imperfect and delayed, had arrived. Yet, the victory felt oddly solitary. I had reclaimed my place in the narrative, but it was not without cost. Memories of Eleanor, of the years she shielded me, of her unwavering belief in my worth, haunted every quiet moment. She had prepared me for this life in subtle ways. Lessons in patience, resilience, and moral clarity that no wealth or privilege could ever replace. She had given me the courage to speak, to act, to reveal the truth no one else could. And in honoring her memory, I finally understood the depth of her sacrifice. I returned to the mansion one final time, not as an intruder or a claimant, but as someone seeking closure. Dust settled on the marble floors. The air smelled faintly of sandalwood and old paper. I moved through the room silently, recalling moments of joy and heartbreak. Each photograph, each piece of furniture, each silent shadow of memory reminded me of the lives intertwined with mine, the betrayals endured, and the victories quietly achieved. Standing in the garden beneath the fig tree, I imagined Eleanor beside me, smiling. Her presence was intangible but unmistakable. I whispered a quiet promise to her. The truth will endure. That night, as I sat alone in my apartment, I reflected on everything. The deceit, the exposure, the fallout. The world had witnessed the collapse of the Harrington dynasty, but the most profound victory was personal. I had reclaimed my identity, preserved Eleanor's legacy, and ensured that Milo would grow up with a foundation of honesty and love that I had been denied for too long. Strength, I realized, was not just in confronting lies, but in sustaining the integrity of one's spirit despite them. The envelope that had carried months of evidence, letters, and revelations now lay in my desk drawer. Its significance had not diminished. It had fulfilled its purpose. It was no longer a weapon, but a testament, a symbol of patience, courage, and unwavering commitment to truth. I allowed myself a deep breath, the kind that only comes when the storm has finally passed, and the weight of fear and anticipation has lifted. Tomorrow, I would continue my life quietly, but differently. I would carry forward the lessons learned, the values instilled, and the knowledge that truth, once fully embraced, could never be erased. And as I looked toward the horizon, I felt a strange, profound peace. I had walked through shadows, faced betrayal, and emerged intact. Eleanor had been right. Strength is measured not by power or wealth, but by the courage to preserve the truth, no matter the cost. And in that courage, I had found my home,